Hey everybody, welcome back to Bald Movies. We got something new and interesting on multiple different fronts here. Multiple fronts.
That's
Number
how
one,
Patrick Stewart would say fronts.
France. This is born Jean-Luc Picard, born in France. This is a documentary which we haven't done for a while. 2014 documentary, which sets to explain the first 3 seasons of Star Trek: The Next Generation. It's called Chaos on the Bridge. It was written, directed, and stars William Shatner. I'm shaky about the first 2, but he's definitely a big part of the documentary on the third.
Though not as much as you might expect, given his reputation.
That's true. He actually was pretty generous interviewee.
Yeah.
And I'm going to talk about that here in a minute, or we'll talk about that. Second interesting thing is commissions are back, baby. We announced it a couple weeks ago, and Ann Merin is the first to take us up on our offer. You might recognize Ann from sponsoring some bidet giveaways in some Bald Move charity runs of years past.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like really, I know, enthusiastic about the commissions and devastated when we turned them off. And boy, no surprise she's the first in line to get one. But she wanted us to watch this documentary, which was very generous of her because, you know, we love Star Trek, particularly The Next Generation. Ann's dedication / notes were as follows. She says, in 1986, I'm having a hard time with the enunciation today.
That's how Patrick Stewart would say it.
In 1980 sucks. That's more of a Sean Connery.
Yeah.
In 1986, Paramount Studios decided to launch a new Star Trek series without Gene Roddenberry. What happens next is the resulting tumultuous power struggles that shape the first 3 seasons of The Next Generation and is the focus of this documentary, written and directed by William Shatner. Shatner is a good, maybe even great interviewer, and his one-on-one conversations with all the key players make up most of the content, along with the graphic novel-inspired illustrations of some of the more dramatic moments. What makes this documentary particularly entertaining are some of the fascinating villains, like the pompous studio exec who proudly boasts about the time he belittled Patrick Stewart in front of a packed Paramount commissary. There's Gene Roddenberry's lawyer who used to break into the writers' offices and tamper with scripts. And Maury Hurley, head writer for the first 2 seasons, who Shatner jokingly calls the gunslinger because of all the screaming showdown matches he had with pretty much everyone, including Roddenberry. Most notably, Chaos on the Bridge describes Gene Roddenberry's final years, his genius, paranoia, and the power struggles that almost destroyed the show. Though some, like Patrick Stewart and Gates McFadden, saw Roddenberry as a visionary, others found his ideas of a conflict-free society, and this is an exact phrase, wacky doodle. Mm-hmm. Of course, in the end, spoiler alert, Roddenberry dies during the 3rd season, which freed the production writing staff to make TNG stories more character-driven and to create the expanded Star Trek universe we all know and love today. Content warning, if you have any aspirations to work in the entertainment industry, you may come away from this documentary wondering why anyone would want to work in this industry that's full of assholes. And thank you so much for commissioning this podcast. Jim, what did you think of Chaos on the Bridge?
I mostly liked it. I thought, I hinted that, William Shatner can be a bit much in the inflated ego department from time to time.
Waistline.
But he does not let that get in the way of doing a good interview here. I assumed going into this that it would be some kind of hit piece from Shatner, who was jealous of not getting involved in the in the renaissance of Star Trek on television. Mm-hmm. And I was amazed at how little that played into it. And if it is a hit piece, it's I don't even want to say well disguised, because that's what it is, right? But it's not maybe from the angle that I was thinking. It's more like getting all the writers together and just talking about like what happened here, and
right.
Producers and all that stuff. So I kept looking for that angle, and it wasn't there, and I was pleasantly surprised by that. And then it was... I don't know if you can find this information elsewhere, because this documentary is made in 2014. Mm-hmm. So it's, almost 30 years after the fact, because we're talking about like 1986 to 89 events here.
Right.
And I'm sure that stuff's out there, but like I don't actively go seeking it out most of the time. And so when I come across a gem like this, it just has so many stories that I'm like, wow, I can't believe that happened. I can't believe any of this shit worked. I can't believe they made it out of the first season, just because of all of the problems and struggles. And that's really the focus of the documentary. And I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm totally in the tank for Star Trek: The Next Generation. It's like a very seminal television show in my development as a person and my appreciation for entertainment. And I followed a lot of the industry gossip because like I used to subscribe to Starlog magazine and read some of the other science fiction trades and stuff because I was a I was a bit of a nerd.
Oh yeah.
And but the thing is how much sanitization happens and how much disinformation happened in those things. Like I feel like that back in these days that like Starlog would just credulously report anything a director or executive producer would tell them. And it's like I think if this documentary is to be believed, I got some wrong information about some things. Like for example, I remember watching this Good Morning America piece with all the crew and like remember remarking like, wow, they literally have everyone here except for Patrick Stewart, and finding out I guess why. And you can actually see that I watched like an hour and a half of Star Trek The Next Generation outtakes because number one, this is actually very hard to find. You can't rent it anywhere.
Yeah.
But it's up on it's in you can buy it as a Blu-ray or a DVD on Amazon. Otherwise, at least in America, you have to watch it on YouTube with Spanish subtitles, which did detract from the experience.
Embedded subtitles, yeah.
Embedded subtitles, yeah, you can't turn them off. And one of the things that was auto-suggested was like a reel of Next Generation bloopers. And I'm like, fuck yeah, I've seen a few of these. But I'm going to say I watched like an hour and a half of them. It was great. It really put a smile on my face. And like you, like, yeah, like I knew some of this stuff, but a lot of it was new. And like some of the stuff, like I particularly enjoyed, there's only like 60 to 90 seconds of it, but every moment of Jonathan Frakes and William Shatner sharing the screen is fucking gold. Those hams are hamming off each other and like embellishing each other's story. It was a delight. I wish there was 30 minutes of just that part of the interview. But honestly, everyone
there is, right? It
probably
exists somewhere, but
oh god,
why has that footage been released?
I would pay $20-$30 just to get if the Blu-ray has those extra features. I might order it because there's a couple noticeable, like Brent Spiner wasn't in this at all. I don't think LeVar Burton. Actually, you know what? There's a lot of people that weren't in it, especially if you're talking about current day. There was some like clips of them and stuff, but like I don't think they had Michael Dorn. But they essentially, I guess it's like it was more about the people who had problems or were at the center of the controversy and stuff.
Right,
it wasn't just about them.
That's why I mean it is a hit piece, right? Like if they're focusing on the negative here and how this all was just a shit show from start to season 3. But it didn't feel like it had an agenda. So beyond that, right? Like
it because like you and I comment all the time how Star Trek. The Next Generation first 2 seasons, the leap between season 1 and season 2 is pretty big, but season 2, season 3 is enormous. Like everything just kind of smooths out, and I just thought it's like, well, that's how television works, it takes a while to build up the characters and the information, what you know about them, but it turns out like this thing makes a pretty compelling case. It was a storytelling direction decision, to stop putting emphasis on Planet of the Week and Monster of the Week and Alien of the Week and start actually thinking like, is this a Worf episode? Is this a Data episode? Is this a Troy episode? Everyone needs to have like a long, these long, like an hour long arc that we can give them a little bit at a time. And boy, the show just really takes off after that. Who'da thunk? Who'da thunk that you concentrate on the characters and the relationships with themselves and the audience relationships with that, and it'll be more successful and more fun to watch. Who'da thunk?
Yeah, which seems like we're rounding into like every writer on television and movies understanding that now. But this was 30 years ago, so like,
right.
And it's amazing the journey that they had to take to get to that point. And part of that is, Roddenberry's fault. Part of that is a Maurice Hurley guy. Part of that is
Lenny, the lawyer.
Maislish just coming. Like the script gremlin. Like, he comes in the middle of the night and swaps out like a quarter of your script.
Yeah,
And
he's
the fuck, man. And they tried to get this guy off the lot. He just kept showing up. There are so many great stories in here, and they're mostly about how harrowing this all was. But I really appreciated like the journey from the initial storytelling idea, which I think is really cool and interesting. And I think some of those writers found a way to work within, which was Roddenberry's vision of humanity has solved a lot of its problems, and its interpersonal struggles, right? And now all of the threats are going to come from without.
Yeah.
But that really presented a barrier to traditional dramatic storytelling. And it's why you see seasons 1 and 2 kind of like, we don't know what the hell to do with any of these characters because they can't argue with each other.
They didn't feel human. And, think about how many in Breaking Bad or Mad Men or the Leftovers, how many screaming matches happen between characters?
Yeah.
And how much drama you generate between like people just doing dirty to each other, doing wrong. And Star Trek, like that's just not how people in the 24th century behave.
Mm-hmm.
They listen to each other. They take each other seriously. There's no sexism. There's no racism. There's no class. People aren't, their ideas aren't dismissed because of who it comes from. Mm-hmm. Like your fight, I used to make this argument with my mom all the time because she like had this idea that like I couldn't partake of any entertainment that had violence. Well, that had like violence, conflict, or magic. And I'm like, what is a story without conflict? Like, I understood this. I was 13 years old. And listening to these writers pull their hair out, it's like, man, you're fighting with one arm tied behind your back when you can't have the characters themselves embroiled in conflict. But I think it overall, let me reset. But I think that limitation... I think there's other problems in the first 2 seasons, but it's like I don't think they kept true to that like most of the conflict was not between the crew for like stupid misunderstandings, ego, jealousy, right. Like that shit just didn't even exist throughout the crew. Like the idea that Picard as a routine set piece would invite his senior crew into a conference room and have a fucking meeting.
Yeah.
Like even today, that sounds wild that you would grind your show to a halt for 5-10 minutes to have a business meeting. Like, but it fucking works, man.
No, I think it's great. The balance they struck between, the conflict between the crew members and the conflict from, alien races and the internal conflict, right? Like so many of these characters are internally conflicted. Especially Data. I mean, he's kind of the prime example. Like, how is he going to be more human? It's not within his nature, but maybe it could be. I think they found a great balance between all of those things. And it really starts to stand out in subsequent seasons.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about this in kind of a structured way? Because I thought we could start up front with the man up front, Gene Roddenberry.
Okay.
And he seemed like a real man of contradictions. In fact, one of the early scenes is... like it seemed like 30 people in quick succession doing a sound bite, and it was just like, Gene's the kindest man I've ever met. Gene's a real fucking asshole. Mm-hmm. Gene is the greediest money grub versus he's so kind. Like, what do you think explains the different ways in which we see Gene in this documentary? Because I got a couple theories, but I was wondering if you had
alcohol. I don't know. That's got to be part of it, right?
Blame it on the yeah,
but also, I mean, look, people aren't just one thing, and if you get somebody who's under extreme stress, who normally is the nicest person you've ever met, they can snap, they can be angry, they can be short with you. People are very much an amalgamation of good and bad.
Yeah. I think that, like, I wonder how much age had to do with it, because they laid this case out that, like, Gene Roddenberry had tried to get a lot of stuff in through Hollywood. Mm-hmm. They had the they had these transitional things where they would have everything drawn in kind of like a Wild Wild West schematic thing. But they had him like out in the desert, and there's all these signposts pointing to Spectre and all these other pilots that he tried to get off and they'd failed. They even left off my favorite posthumous project of his, Earth Final Conflict.
Right.
But and also it wasn't Andromeda. That was another Gene Roddenberry fucking from the grave Majel Barrett situation.
Maybe.
The Kevin Sorbo post Hercules nightmare. But I wonder, like, because he had this like massive chip on his shoulder that he had made Paramount and CBS a pile of money on this show that also they point out that like it was not like Star Trek was always on the verge of failing. Like he made 3 barely successful television seasons and then had a 30-year gap, and it made it seem like he had 2 things going on. The fans kept writing him letters, and he had an office in Paramount where he would just like spend all his day corresponding with fans and buttering them up and vice versa. So his ego's getting fluffed and fluffed and fluffed versus the reality of him being a virtual has-been. And then in his old age, when he may be a little crankier, maybe less in control of his mental and emotional facilities, gets handed this like home run opportunity and like is like, God damn it, this is what I'm going to be remembered for. This is going to be my legacy. And it like gripped him so up that he was a fundamentally more mean and short person.
Yeah, it's strange how they frame it. And I don't know if this is, I mean, it's obviously Shatner. He wrote and directed this thing. Framing everything about this period and really about Roddenberry as a power struggle. I don't like that. But I'm sure that's how it is in Hollywood. I'm sure like it's all about power dynamics, and if you're out, you're out, and if you're in, you better make the best of it because you're going to be out soon.
You're either winning or you're losing, and your winning necessitates other people losing. Yeah, it's very dog eat dog.
Yeah, zero sum kind of. You know, it's nasty, and I don't particularly like it. And many of the writers, you know, there's that. Shit, I don't remember his name, Torme or something, guy who was talking about that, right? And how he hates it. Grew up in a family that was in show business, and it's just like that. And it's so that's kind of like clouded my understanding, but maybe that's what I mean. It seems like that's what Shatner's trying to get at, but I don't know if that's him coming and bringing that to this whole era, or if that's something that was naturally in there. But, you know, taking his word, it seemed like he was trying to, if not mount some kind of comeback, then at least make the most of the power he did have, because by all rights, he was Star Trek, right? Like everybody who was familiar with Star Trek, everybody who was a fan knew the name Roddenberry and thought that he was the primary driving force of that. And without Roddenberry and Star Trek, I don't know that... I think they're right. I don't know that you could have done a reboot of a television series in the Star Trek universe without him.
And I remember this, the fans being very divided about, like, everyone wanted more Star Trek, but we all assumed that it would be because the old crew were still making movies.
Right.
It's not like they were gone and retired. Like, we were very popular, successful movies.
Yeah.
But Roddenberry, and I guess I didn't know this either because he was always credited as executive producer and consultant and all this stuff. But, like, essentially since Star Trek The Motion Picture, Roddenberry had been shoved off the project. He had been barred from, you know, like, we don't want you anywhere near with your shitty utopian hornball ideas, because that's the other interesting thing that they kind of made a contrast that, like, Gene Roddenberry as a young man writes Jean-Luc Picard, writes James T. Kirk, who's buff and handsome and young and virile and fucking girls and punching aliens
and fucking aliens too.
And fucking aliens, yeah, and punching girls.
Sure,
I'm sure, yeah, I'm pretty sure there was a Gladiator episode where he did.
Oh yeah.
And then, you know, Roddenberry, I always thought that showed an evolution of the Federation, but also saying, like, you know, Roddenberry in his old age was a little bit more mellow and a lot more like, you know, I want these other wackadoo ideas of, like, people not, you know, being embroiled in accumulation. It's so funny to hear this old Hollywood guy being like, Gene's crazy wackadoo ideas that the human race will eventually, you know, stop trying to accumulate things like toddlers. Like, who the fuck? What kind of sense does this make?
Yeah, that guy's funny.
But he just kind of aged and kind of mellowed out and was like more, you know, now I want a captain who, but the documentary kind of contradicts itself because Roddenberry was very against Patrick Stewart being hired because he's this old bald guy.
Yeah.
That wasn't anything like Kirk. So which one's right, or maybe it's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
Yeah, I mean, I think so I felt like this documentary was a little disjointed at the beginning. It didn't have like a narrative that it was really trying to build, other than like the beginning of this was a struggle. And one thing it does say, is that Roddenberry was a man of contradictions, and so I guess you can chalk it up to that, right? Like, okay, at one point he's this, at another point he's this, and maybe, at both points he's both of those things. It's just what manifests in any given environment.
Or you have an efficient, maybe he wanted the efficient, kind of businessman executive that Picard was, but he wanted a full head of hair and broad shoulders and a washboard abs. Like, he's like, I still want women to be attracted to them.
And it turns out that plenty of women are attracted to Patrick Stewart.
You don't say.
Yes.
You don't say.
He's a very good looking and attractive man.
Quite a few gentlemen too, I imagine.
So.
So the other thing I thought was interesting is the inclusion of this Wild West motif.
Don't like it.
Like with the Western, that's just Bill Shatner, right?
That's 100% Shatner being old Star Trek.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, it's got to be. Well,
he likes that horse and cowboy shit anyway, too.
Yeah. He owns his own ranch, his own horse, his own horse charity with his wife. So like, the man is a bit of a cowboy, and James T. Kirk was a bit of a cowboy, and that motif comes from, I think, the original Star Trek, but that changed. And I didn't like it. I loved the illustrations. I thought the person who illustrated this is a freaking genius. It was hilarious. It captured everyone's essence, but it just didn't fit with what I think of as Star Trek in the modern era. It's much more a classical Star Trek kind of motif.
It also seemed like it's part of the narrative, because they were trying to suggest that these people are high-stake poker players, desperados, struggling for supremacy over this small-time writer's room, like a small-time Western town. But I was trying to think, is like, how much of this is Bill Shatner and how much of this was someone's idea of like, oh, Star Trek is supposed to be a chuck wagon through the stars,
right? And
kind of a space Western in the vein of Firefly, or I guess the Fireflies is in the vein of, and they're using that aesthetic. But I thought, I thought it was pretty much like 90% Shatner being like, hey, yeah, man, put some Ponderosa in there.
Yeah, it was weird.
Yeah, and it's especially the music. Like, this would have been, I feel like this documentary would have felt a little bit more polished if they just used some TNG music or some knockoff TNG music. Like like instead of playing the, menacing banjo when evil Paramount executive, Jack Dickface, instead of playing the evil banjo, like imagine they just played the ominous Federation horns that accompanied a commercial break cliffhanger. Like when, like, I just thought that would have worked a lot better.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know, because like they also were trying to capture the character, and I can't remember this guy's name.
Jack Reacher, Jack Ryan,
John
Pike.
Reacher. That's John Pike.
Yeah.
As Ann alludes to, he is just a massive asshole.
Yeah,
like
fuck that guy.
Every opportunity he has to de-escalate, he escalates. He plays needless power games. Like he brags in the very beginning of the documentary that he has Roddenberry at this high stakes poker table where he is demanding from Roddenberry that he has to write a 2-hour script for the premiere. It has to be a 2-part premiere, and he didn't really care. And he also knew that Roddenberry could walk, and if he walked, he was fucked out of millions of dollars, because the fan community is already like, fuck this Picard and Riker and Data shit. We want Kirk, Spock, McCoy. We want the old Enterprise. They're still out there. We're hungry for it. We want more of it. And if he tried to go with that Roddenberry, the project would be doomed from the start. Why? Why does this man do this?
I don't know. I really don't know. If I could understand almost if it was something with like, where money was at stake, or like positions within the company were at stake, but it seems like there's no stakes here, and you just want to inject some form of rivalry.
Yeah. Like your star actor has a little, maybe, okay, let's talk. There's this incident, I think it was on Good Morning America, could have been on the Today Show, where they had the Paramount had arranged for the entire cast and crew to do this, like, kind of like the entire episode was around the Star Trek thing. They were going to, like, have a meeting on 10 Forward, and they had all the cast there. And Patrick Stewart had just, like, before he agreed to do it, said, hey, this is a serious show and the fans really take it serious. Like, I don't want any jokes. I don't want any Klingon stupid stuff. I want this to be, like treated like a quality television show. And he shows up to the set, and like the very first thing he sees the weatherman in the captain, I guess he says his uniform. I don't know if he literally means that, but like, and making Star Trek jokes. And he's like, you know what? Fuck this. I'm out. Yeah.
So the dude was wearing his uniform. I watched this. I went and I watched the Good Morning America segment. The dude was sitting in 10 Forward with a Romulan behind the bar serving him strange alien drinks.
Yes.
In Captain Picard's uniform.
Yes. Exactly this kind of thing that Patrick Stewart requested not to be. So he storms off the set, and this guy calls a meeting and says, hey, I'll meet you at this Paramount restaurant on the thing, and in a very busy time when everyone will see him there. And he deliberately makes Patrick Stewart wait for 15 minutes as a power move. And this is between season 3. And I wonder if this is like, I think this is between season 3 or 4. It might be between season 2 and 3, which wouldn't make my point as strong. But like, I wonder if this is where some of these rumors of Patrick Stewart leaving the show that scared the shit out of me in this long summer between season 3 and season 4, where Picard was Borgified and Riker just ordered him to be fired on by their super weapon. But he shows up and says, late, and says, you know what, Patrick, let's just nip this in the bud. I understand you're unhappy. I don't want to star your caliber, disrespected this way. Let's just cut your contract early at the end of the season and, part of separate ways. And what if that had happened? Like, I don't know. It'd been interesting to see Captain Riker, but holy shit. And again, because Patrick Stewart stormed maybe it was a little high-handed, but he had a legitimate grievance.
So I'm actually incredibly happy to see that Patrick Stewart is a human being that gets angry. Because, like, I think of him in these terms of Jean-Luc Picard, and Jean-Luc Picard very rarely, if ever, loses his temper. It seems like Patrick Stewart on a, fairly regular. I don't know. There are several instances he mentions of him, being in an argument or being very angry. It's comforting to know that even your heroes, people you look up to, can have their bad days.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's bullshit. Why do that? Why bother?
The line must be drawn here at costumed weathermen, no further. And he storms out of the set. I don't know. And then the Patrick Stewart tells the story, and he's like, "Oh, that's bullshit."
He says, "I don't recall that very well."
He said he called me in his office, gave me a dressing down, and then said at the end of it, but like just off the record, I understand your point, and I see. So it's like that's the other thing is like, is this guy even telling the truth when he's talking? Like Roddenberry's dead. What's he going to say? There's like 5 people in the room. Roddenberry's going to turn from the grave and be like, nah, you begged me to do that 2-hour script, you fucking, and I had you by the balls. And
either scenario makes this dude look like an asshole, because in one scenario, he looks like an asshole in 1986. In the other scenario, he looks like an asshole in 2014, sitting in that chair lying to you about a meeting that never happened. Like,
and you gotta play hardball for creative purposes or for like to save budget, because the show's going to be canceled unless you carve $1 million out of it and whatever. But like, and they also strongly imply that Denise Richards, Denise Crosby, Lieutenant Yar, got written out of the set because she just complained about not getting screen time.
Yeah, and
instead of addressing, and it's a shame because if she had stuck around to season 3, she would have gotten her fair share. Yeah. But like she didn't say like, get me out of this show, I want a Hollywood career. She's kind of like, hey, you know what? It'd be nice to be more than just, like she said, literally entire episodes, she'd be on set for 12 hours and the only thing you'd see is her legs behind the famous tactical horseshoe and on the bridge of the Enterprise. And I'm like, why would you do that? I remember I really liked Tasha Yar, and nothing else. She's fucking Data. That was cool. Why do
Yeah,
you do that for a legitimate grievance?
it's a waste of time, right? As an actor, I have to imagine you feel time pressure in your
Yeah.
career, right? As you get older, your career, for most people, is not as strong as it can be when you're young. And so to stand there for potentially 7 years on the bridge of the Enterprise, not getting any lines, not getting any portfolio. What are you going to go to them and say, yeah, I was in Star Trek Next Generation? Oh, no, your legs were. If we
Here's
need a
four
leg model, we'll call you. But like,
here's 4 scenes of me exclusively talking about my past, where as a young teenage woman I avoided the rape gangs of Planet Fuck You for 3. Like that was her whole, like I
it
couldn't
was.
believe we just recently watched the whole first episode season on the Twitch watch party. I couldn't believe that like that's like literally was that's if she had a line,
Mm.
it was either being abducted by that weird racist African warlord character, or you talking about her evading the rape gangs of the prison planet she grew up on.
Yeah.
It's like come rough shit, man.
That's not building your repertoire.
No, and everybody like was getting short shrift. Like, what do we know about Worf that we didn't know from the pilot? What
Or
do we know
Geordi.
about Yeah, like Deanna came off a little bit better because Majel Barrett, probably a little nepotism there, was written into the show, and that was her mom, so she got a couple early arcs because of that kind of coattail stuff. But like,
Mm.
other than Riker and Picard, they didn't get a lot of screen time and a lot,
Data.
certainly not plots. Yeah. So I don't know. I wonder like what would have been if you had a couple of more cooler heads on top in early goings of Star Trek.
Yeah, and it's also hilarious to me to hear the things that they say that are now totally wrong. Like the idea that you couldn't make a successful sequel to a science fiction show on television,
yeah.
because like all we get now are remakes and reboots and sequels, and like you get occasional new properties, but for the most part we're stuck in sequel land. We're stuck in reboots and nostalgia and like all that stuff. So,
and like stuff that they said like literally you think like recasting the original crew of Star Trek and doing that, like we've successfully done that and beat that into the ground.
yeah.
I thought it was interesting that they originally had Patrick Stewart read in a bad toupee.
That they flew in from another country.
Yeah, like he had an emergency in case of audition toupee in his home back in England that they broke the glass on and shipped over, and he pasted on his head to read a few lines.
That's incredible. Like the amount of time, effort, money spent on flying in a man's fake hair. I don't know. I'd like to see the bill for that.
Well, it's like we were just talking about this Corey Stoll in that season of The Strain.
Right.
Like Corey Stoll is a very distinguished actor because of his bald head, and you put him in a bad toupee. What the fuck? Like I can't even imagine Patrick Stewart in like some kind of Bill Shatner get up.
I mean, the only reason to do that with an actor, in my opinion, is so that you can maybe age them convincingly later on, or have a plot line that revolves around their losing their hair. I don't know. There aren't a lot of legitimate reasons to put a bald man in a toupee anymore.
Yeah. And the other thing is like Patrick Stewart kind of owned up to this because it's funny. If you ever watch a compilation of Star Trek The Next Generation outtakes, which I have, you might come to the conclusion that Patrick Stewart is one of the bigger hams because like his favorite thing to do is one of his co-actors break is just to make these ridiculous rubber-faced mugging things. That's hilarious. You've probably seen him in tons of reaction gifs at this point. But like I guess this first season or two, he was actively annoyed at the Hollywood culture of like, we're going to learn our lines kinda, but also we might need 12 takes to get through this scene. And if we blow a line, we might all laugh and collapse and make jokes and do all that kind of stuff. Like he's from a Royal Shakespeare Theater Company, and he wasn't fucking having it.
You don't get second chances on the stage. There are no cuts.
Yeah, but it's funny because you listen to the other. So he's kind of like, it sounds like they met in the middle, that where he was like mellowed out a little bit, but also his relentless professionalism rubbed off on the rest of the crew, and they're like, God, we don't want to get on the bad side of Patrick. We don't want to let Patrick down. So like they kind of met in the middle. He was a little allowed to be a little silly and have fun, and maybe not sweat the line so much too, because I imagine that's super cranky. And especially when you're getting these scripts 2 and 3 days that have had half the script replaced, and you're trying to memorize this stuff. Imagine him like staying up till 4 o'clock in the morning to learn his lines, and then everybody else is like, "Fuck, they gave me a script the day before. All right," and like that would be infuriating.
Yeah.
But my favorite part of the whole documentary is the exchange between Jonathan Frakes and William Shatner, where Frakes was talking about what a stickler Patrick Stewart was, and he was talking about like they did sing and dance and wrestle, and Bill Shatner was like, "Oh my God, you guys were like rolling on the floor and dancing." He's like, "Yeah, Bill, you're acting like you didn't do this." And Bill says, "No, I didn't." He's like, "Oh, Bill." Like, I feel like Shatner, I don't know. Do you think Shatner was like super duper serious on the set of Star Trek?
It seems hard to be super duper serious on that set. Like
you're watching a man with glue-on ears mind meld with a pile of foam.
Exactly.
And like,
yeah. Like while he's holding a dildo-shaped rock. Yeah. I don't think you could really keep a straight face totally on that thing.
Yeah.
My favorite part of the documentary is hearing about the Borg storyline, because it's something we discussed, and having just come to the end of season 2. Season 1, we sort of see like maybe there's a setup for that, and you can see them kind of gearing up to get into season 2 full bore with the Borg. And I think that would have been a huge mistake, because the Borg storyline is something that kind of spans the entirety of Star Trek: The Next Generation and makes every season that it appears in more enjoyable, in my opinion, because it's a fantastic hook. They wanted to shotgun through that in season 2, to start season 2 with the Borg, and then have them defeat the Borg by the end of it, which would have set an impossibly high bar for seasons 3 through 7 if they had actually achieved that, right? Like the conspiracy, they talk about the conspiracy stuff a little bit too, and how they wanted that to be more of a thing. But
no, I actually think that because that's coming away from the first season of Star Trek that we just recently watched together. That conspiracy stuff worked really well for me. And in hindsight, as an adult, like it didn't work so well for me as a kid because it scared the piss out of me. These like parasites infecting and how disgusting they were.
Oh yeah, that final scene with them is horrific.
That would have been, I think, a really cool early episode arc, or early couple season arc, and then get to the Borg later on. But they just never come back to that. In fact, like I was shocked to see the Neutral Zone episode explicitly, because I remember when we were watching, I'm like, wait, they're actually setting up the Borg here. And you're like, oh, no, they're not. I'm like, no, they're talking like what other species can carve off entire cities from planets and lift it up in the orbit. It's like, that's got to be the Borg, and the Romulans don't fucking know about it. And like like the Borg are introduced like halfway through season 2. So,
but it seemed like they were going to do that faster. Except the writer's strike happened, and then they got derailed on their whole plans for season 2, which caused season 2 to be pretty shitty, but also I think might have saved the show overall, because if they hit Borg season 2, where does season 3 go? They'd have to come up with something bigger and better, and it didn't seem like they had the will, I guess, in that writing room to really make those kind of leaps.
They went through 30 writers in the first 2 seasons.
Yeah, man.
I don't know. It's a will thing. It's almost like a person that gets in there and gets traction is gone next week. So fuck it, If you weren't like Gene Roddenberry's close friend, like DC Fontana, that worked with him in the beginning and is a well-respected science fiction writer in his own right, or like his personal lawyer, or literally has the authority to fire him, he didn't give a shit what you thought. Yeah. There's like a really amazing line, because this guy that he got to run, this Maury, who said, he said, I'm fighting for the show that Gene wants to make, because Gene was always like, oh, I have these high-minded ideals and all that. It's like, hey, this episode, let's get Picard's dick wet, And he's like, that's not what the show's about. But also, he got, like, I guess Patrick Stewart refused to read a line that one of the writers had written. And first of all, I got to know what this fucking line is. Yeah. Like, what is the line where Patrick Stewart's like, nope, I'm staying out in my trailer. I'm staying in my shitty trailer until you guys fix this. But Maury went in to tell this executive at Paramount, it's like, you know what? Here's what we do. Between season 1 and 2, the Enterprise will suffer a tragic accident, the loss of all hands, and we'll just assemble a crew and a new ship. And
Terrible idea.
these guys were ready to go to the fucking the mattresses at the slightest provocation.
Yeah.
Like all of these guys on the head at the head of this thing in the first couple seasons were just Brinksman all the time. Brinksman and women.
Yeah, and I don't know how much of this is me just knowing how it turns out and being so pleased with the series overall, thinking that that's a terrible idea. Maybe they could have pulled it off. Maybe they do some anthology type thing, right? Every year, a new Enterprise because the last one gets blown up, and new crew.
That's what they're supposed to do with Disco, right? And I guess what they're actually going to do with the new Star Trek spinoff that they're doing is going to be an anthology each season, something slightly different. But same thing, like Gates McFadden. I remember I thought that this was because a combination of her being pregnant or working on a movie that she took a 1-season hiatus, but she was forced off the show and they fully intended to replace her with this Pulaski doctor, except for I forget the name of the actress. Didn't get along with the cast, didn't get along with the crew, didn't like the technological focus of the first few seasons over the actors, and said fuck this, and they had to go back and beg Gates McFadden to come back, because I hated Pulaski. Like she was clearly a gender bent McCoy there to resurrect the McCoy versus Spock energy with Data, and it just didn't, like, it just made her seem needlessly cruel and antagonistic.
And it was anti Roddenberry, right? Like his vision.
Yeah,
it's strange that they would bring in that character and then do that with her, considering their stance, Maury's stance on how Roddenberry felt, you know?
Yeah, like when she calls him Data, and he's like, oh, my name's Data. And she's like, oh, what's the difference? Like, fuck you, lady. One's his name and one's not, which is essentially what he says. But, like, she's just, God, I hated that character. So, and then this was all, again, all this massive upheaval was essentially the three dudes on top, Roddenberry, Maury, and John Coleman, or whatever the hell his name is. So they talked about the things that did work, and the holodeck.
Yeah.
Man, the holodeck is such a fantastic idea, and it lets them have so much fun throwaway episodes and like infinity sets. Like, you know, you think going to a different planet every week is an excuse to like stretch your imagination. Well, you got a holographic magic land. And that's something that paid off. Like Gene Roddenberry deserves his executive producer credit just for coming up with the fucking holodeck and the transporter, in my opinion. And the other thing they said the three things that worked from season 1: holodeck, Q, and laying down the carpet or the roadway for the Borg. And I think that tracks.
Q is a strange one, right? Because Q wasn't even in season 1 until Roddenberry went and rewrote that pilot as a 2-hour pilot, and he had to add something. And Q is what he came up with. And they make this whole big thing about like, oh, an atheist wrote a God character analog into their atheists do that all the fucking time because God as a concept exists, whether a real God exists or not. So like, it was shocking to me how we got one of the best things of the entirety of Star Trek The Next Generation, in my opinion, from a studio exec saying, nah, we want this thing, and playing that high stakes poker game, right?
And Roddenberry is like, God, I got to fluff up this 45-minute episode into a minute or an hour 30. And you know what? Watching that, it checks out because the Q stuff has nothing to do with the Farpoint stuff. It's the what do they call that? The conceit of the episode, which is they're on trial for how, but it doesn't make sense. Like, this doesn't make sense that humanity is going to be judged on this very minor, low stakes trade deal that the Federation's making with the backwater, and like the other, like, it's what the Cardassians and the Ferengi are in a 3-way bidding match for star bases against the Federation, and this is what humanity's being judged on. What the fuck?
I don't know. It's incredible that turned into, if you step back and look at it, the entire arc of the series, right? Like first episode, last episode, it's all contained within those bookends. Q is kind of like that judgment of humanity is kind of the overall arc for the entire show. Comes from a studio note.
Yeah, I wish I had seen this before. A couple weeks ago, I recorded a podcast with some guys that is about it's called A Podcast But Evil. If you guys want to check it out, my episode's I think coming out next week, but it's on Q, and they invited me on because of my Star Trek background, and we talked about like all the cool things about like why is Q so successful, and it comes down to John Delancey and his performance. Like he's both sharp, he's both very charming, supremely threatening because of his power level and how like capricious he is, and funny and malevolent. He just like and it's all his. It all comes down to his performance. And what they have him do. I mean, like his shtick of like rapidly changing costumes and stuff is just like inherently kind of fun and visually oriented. But like the idea that like that literally was Roddenberry's 2-3 days before we're shooting ass pull to inflate an episode twice its size is what a Hail Mary that connected, man.
And I don't think they found the Q character until later. That first episode is a little different Q, right? A more serious Q. But definitely they backed their way into something that was brilliant.
This is why I feel like that like eventually you could report on, and I always said that like I think the entertainment's going to go the way of ESPN, because one thing sports has is like these mythical things like the catch, where like this like improbable event at a very high stakes thing like the Super Bowl is immortalized because you only see that once every 20 years. And like Q would be, it'd be like, the ass pull, and you would talk about that, like all these all-time great like Hail Mary things that happen in Hollywood, and we just never fucking know until somebody dies and the tell-all comes out, right? But it's inherently fascinating. This Ira Bear, he of the cobalt blue goatee.
Yeah.
Who looks like he's essentially been a pickup artist his entire life,
or a jazz musician who got into like Blade Runner in his late 50s.
That he wrote the like this Rise of Pleasure Planet episode that like he pitched to Gene Roddenberry. He's like, you know what? This is a Kirk episode we're going to write for Picard. He's going to get to punch guys in the face. He's going to get to fuck the girl. He's going to get to solve. And it is one of my early favorite episodes. It's so much fun to watch. But Gene's original concept of this was going to be some kind of like ladies are going to be kissing on ladies, and dudes are going to be kissing on dudes, and they're going to be kissing on each other because it's the 24th century, and what the fuck is sex and gender even? Which is interesting because that a lot of those key themes and concepts end up playing out in Next Generation, which makes it seem literally literal generations ahead of its time. But like everyone involved, even in 2014, is like, oh, what kind of crazy idea that was. But I just thought, it's like, man, what if? And that's where you've got the mini skirts, the 24th century mini skirts. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, before I wanted to mention, I love that Patrick Stewart can only remember one name of one planet in the entirety of the series, and it is Risa. Because I'm kind of like him. Like, yeah. I don't know. That's
wait. How are you like that? Are you only remember the places you've been where you got your dick wet, or are you only?
I only remember Risa. Like that's the only planet that I remember the name of. I'm having trouble thinking of what the planet that the Federation is based on is called.
ER.
Yeah, it's a weird combination of letters.
Something weird. Yeah, it's something weird. But yeah, like we made fun of a lot in season 1 that like. For an enlightened as the Next Generation is, in the very first episode, there's a lady in a very short miniskirt, just like out of the old series. And just when you're about to protest and be like, well, this is a bunch of sexist bullshit, a dude comes by in the exact same uniform, go-go boots and all. And you're like, oh, I see what you did there, Gene. Okay. And he was trying to get like that shit jammed in every single frame.
There are a lot of skirts and I don't mean that in the sexist way that the term is used in Hollywood. I'm sure. Again,
he's kind of ahead of his time. It's like, you could be sexy, just pitch down the middle. Try to be, if you're gonna make Troy wear some ridiculous get up, have Jonathan Frakes wearing a dress with his nipples exposed, wearing jewelry, and putting on perfume the next episode to get sexed up by some Amazon woman. Like, just be fair with it. Nobody will complain if you give everybody a little taste, right?
Yeah, sure. Sexy isn't inherently bad.
Yeah. But I don't know. What then they kind of come to the thesis that I kind of understood, which is Michael Pilar and Rick Berman essentially teamed up as executive producer and head writer to save Star Trek. And the way they did it is move away from the Monster of the Week, Planet of the Week. They still did that, obviously.
Yeah, tons.
But it wasn't like what's going to happen this episode, but who is it going to happen to? How is it going to affect their relationship with the rest of the crew?
Yeah.
Because it's not like Star Trek has continuity, but it's not like it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like every season, each character gets a one wrinkle to them that if you understand that, you'll appreciate the things that preceded it and come after more, but you can still kind of drop in and watch any episode and without missing a beat. And I think that's one of the coolest things about it.
And
it's got just the
is,
perfect amount of continuity for a procedural.
Yeah, this is absolutely kind of the middle of the road for that. And especially when you look at the two series that came before and after. Like Star Trek has almost none of that. The original series, Deep Space Nine, is almost all continuity. So yeah, it seems like there was an evolution of Star Trek that happened somewhere around season 3 and kind of stuck with and I don't know if that's an evolution of television in general, because around the time that was happening, shows were starting to get a little more or less serialized, I guess. I don't know what the term is. I think serialized means it's just like a story and done.
Yes.
Okay, so they were becoming less serialized.
I think, well, I thought procedural is the one where like there's very little continuity. It's the setting itself that generates the stories, and serialized means it's like a longer story. Like each episode is a chapter in a book.
But when I think
you can't
of those old serials, the films, I don't think of like.
But you're wrong, because
continuity.
they did like there'd be a 12-part Flash Gordon, and you had to go every week and that's the buy a ticket and see the next episode.
Well, then there was a shift toward serialization.
Yeah.
That was happening, I think, broader in television around that time, and so Star Trek might have just been picking up the new cues of writing techniques in television from some of these younger generation of people, the next generation of writers.
And probably being a big influence too.
Yeah.
But because it's also interesting that like for whatever reason, none of the studios wanted a piece of this, not even CBS, the original. So as a consequence, Star Trek was what they call first run syndication, which means they produced these episodes for the studio for no one in particular, and then they would sell them to UHF stations, independent stations, non-network affiliates, et cetera, and they would show them frequently out of prime time. Now, I think Star Trek was always 7 p.m. on the Fox affiliate where I grew up.
Yeah.
But it could be anywhere. It could be Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, Thursday evening, like wherever they wanted it. And this was kind of seen as like low budget, low class kind of television. They gave several examples of like what first run syndication type stuff is. But Star Trek is the first one and only one that's ever won an Emmy for best dramatic series, which I didn't even know. I knew Star Trek won a few nominations for special effects and makeup and set design, things like, the bullshit they always give to the genre stuff. But I had no idea it got nominated for the big brass ring that everybody goes for.
Yeah, it seemed like the reaction to Star Trek: The Next Generation is not, I guess, what I would have expected. Like, especially that first episode when they come out with that 2-hour pilot and they sit down with all the people at the company and they show that thing, and everybody was like congratulating themselves on what we largely view as a semi-incoherent mess of a pilot.
It was pretty much a hit, like maybe not critically, but like because they also make the point that like in the mid 80s, science fiction was after a long renaissance is kind of dead as a doornail. Like, at least this kind of like high science fiction. Star Trek's not that high, but like you still have Back to the Future, shit like that. But like the idea that like humans on a spaceship 200 years in the future, 300 years in the future, all that kind of stuff was very much not in the vogue. So I think that I, as a 12-year-old nerd, was like starving for this kind of shit.
Yeah.
And willing to overlook a lot of stuff, and also for everything that people, I guess if you're comparing Star Trek: Next Generation against like the Wrath of Khan, it's pretty, comes out the wanting. But I think even the first few seasons compare pretty favorably to the old series. Like, maybe not as good as the character interactions between like the big three, but like there's some stupid fucking Star Trek the old series episodes.
Oh yeah.
As bad as and worse as anything that Star Trek the Next Generation's come out with. But the final big point I wanted to bring out is like there was a problem with the Picard character, which is he had a massive stick up his ass. And I even noticed we talked about this when we were watching, like how unlikable Picard can be in some of the episodes. And they had this will they won't they between him and Beverly Crusher the entire first season. We joked that like he was always shutting it down with his harm, 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 harm. The Borg kidnapping him and violating him humanized his character for good.
Yeah.
Like he never kind of reverted back to that. Like he always had arcs where he was uncomfortable with children or whatever, but like he like that gave a window into the character that Patrick Stewart was able to really intuitively turn around. And I thought that's an obvious point in retrospect, but I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, it's one that has persisted through 2020, right? Like all the Next Generation movies, several of those were about his experience with the Borg. Picard is almost completely about that. Like, yeah. There's that was a huge watershed moment for that character.
And they made a point of that, like all the things that Star Trek: The Next Generation spawned off, like all the series, all the movies. Because the thing is, like, I don't think a lot of people know that, like, it's not like the old Star Trek movies made serious bank.
Yeah,
they were shot extremely cheaply by reusing sets and uniforms, and in fact, most of the Star Trek shows, like Paramount, they're a master of reusing shit and reusing uniforms and bridges and whatnot. Like, I think the battle bridge of the Enterprise was actually like the Wrath of Khan set or some shit like that. But like they would, for a budget of 20-30 million make 75-80 and make the fans happy. But it's not like Roger Ebert's giving these things 4 stars or getting Academy Awards. They had the $50 million budget making hundreds of $millions worldwide. Like, if Star Trek The Next Generation had failed, I imagine once the original crew ages out of their roles, Star Trek's just gone. Yeah. And maybe gets a cheesy 2000s movie reboot. But all of the Star Trek that's come since, and honestly, if I'm being honest, like the only thing I care about is Deep Space Nine and Picard, kinda. But you wouldn't get it. You wouldn't have gotten it. Did we just talk ourselves out of like thanking Star Trek: The Next Generation? Because you also have to blame it for Voyager, Enterprise, Discovery,
and parts of Picard.
And parts of half of Picard, which it has its fans. They have their fans.
For as long as I remember, I have loved Star Trek: The Next Generation. Even the cheesy bits, they're shitty, they're cheesy, but I love them. Can't help but love them. I love Deep Space Nine. That's kind of where it ends. Picard was okay.
Yeah.
Discovery was okay for the first season. I didn't watch much of the second. But yeah,
well,
I'll be a fan if they keep making something watchable.
I'll always be a fan. Like, I'll never stop being a Star Trek fan and quoting it and loving it and having fond memories. If they make Star Trek that's, to my cup of tea or to my taste again, then sure, I'll get back into it. But what else do we have to say about this?
I think that's it.
Well, thank you, Ann, for commissioning this podcast. Really appreciate it. Hope we gave you and your husband something interesting to watch or listen to. And the other thing I guess I said is we've made a reference to these watch parties that we're doing. Twitch, in partnership with Amazon, allows you to watch on their streaming service with an audience anything that's in their Prime library. The entirety of Star Trek: The Next Generation is in their live library. So during this COVID time of not much television, we've been watching with the Bald Move family Star Trek: The Next Generation. We just got done with the first season, and you might have missed it. Too bad. But But we saved all of those those watches, and we're going to embed some time codes in those and make them available for club members. So if you want to watch us watch the cheesiest of Star Trek: The Next Generation, that first season will soon be available. And I think we're going to be starting our live watches of season 2 starting soon. Follow @BaldMove on Twitter if you want to keep up with the latest of that, or go to twitch.tv/BaldMove and subscribe so you get notified of all of our broadcasts and whatnot. So It's a lot of fun. If you're an Amazon Prime member, it works flawlessly. The episode shows right in front of you. We're up in the corner giving our commentary, making jokes, interacting with chat. It's a lot of fun. And also commissioned podcasts. If you think this seems like a cool idea that you can make us watch any piece of entertainment and we'll make a podcast about it, you can take us up on that offer at support.baldmove.com. There's a commission a podcast link. You put your money down, you put the title of the thing that you want, you hit submit, and then I'll get back with you shortly and firm up the details and make it happen. So really pleased to be doing this again. It's pretty exciting. Thanks, Ann, for popping the commission cherry. You can't do that again. You can't.
No, you can't
the
put the cherry back in the bottle.
got the second go of virginity.
Yeah.
And Ann just plucked that flower.
And she plucked it twice because the next one I think we're doing is Galaxy Quest, which is, we've got this line of like the Star Trek documentary, then the Star Trek parody-esque film, which is fantastic. I've recently rewatched it.
Throw me in that briar patch of a rich vein of Star Trek content. I will smash these commissions out of the park every single time.
Hell yeah.
But it's been a lot of fun. I hope you guys have all enjoyed it. We will be back, of course, next with whatever movies and projects we're working on. We already have another commission. Galaxy Quest will be coming out pretty soon. But yeah, we will see you then. Until then, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Jim.
Later.